Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. Adana stood behind the faded curtain that hung unevenly between their shop's tiny storeroom and the open front, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and throat. The baby lay fast asleep on her back, warm and limp like freshly cooked yam wrapped in cloth. She had only stepped inside to fetch a clean napkin, but her ears caught the low tone of Uzoma's voice, gentler than usual, careful, almost private. He sat on the wooden bench she often dragged outside to chase some breeze when the day got too hot, the phone pressed lightly to his ear. His tone was not alarming, but it carried a texture Adana had never heard before, like palm oil that hid pepper in its smoothness. "Ah, sorry, and you're sick," he said, voice dipped in concern. "Send me your account number. Let me put something small for the drugs." The woman's voice on the other end responded with a mixture of laughter and coughing, the kind of laughter that made Adana's heart do a somersault. It wasn't what he said that bothered her, it was how he said it. His voice had never bent so softly, not even for her when she had malaria and couldn't lift her head. She stood still, one hand on the edge of the curtain, her heart galloping like a goat being chased by rain. The phone call ended, and Uzoma muttered something under his breath as he adjusted his stool. Adana remained hidden for a heartbeat longer, not because she was spying, but because she didn't trust herself not to cry in front of him. Before the silence between them began to grow teeth, before she started listening for meaning in everything he did not say, there had been an invitation. Uzoma had looked her in the eye one warm evening after dinner, picked up their daughter from her woven mat, and said, "Adana, it's time you started coming to the shop." His tone wasn't commanding, nor was it pleading. It was the tone of a man opening the door of his world to someone he trusted. For Adana, it felt like a gift, a chance to leave behind the endless hum of house chores and step into the rhythm of commerce, to stand beside her husband and watch the wheels that fed their family turn. She had felt a new energy that morning when she tied the baby to her back and wore her simple brown gown with flat slippers. The air in Iduama's Central Market had a scent that day, a mix of ripe pawpaw, ironed money, and ambition. The shop itself was modest, with glass shelves and rolls of charger cords, USB devices, and memory cards arranged like soldiers on parade. Uzoma welcomed her with a proud smile and offered her the plastic chair near the cash box. Customers came and went. He handled them like a man playing chess, never in a hurry, always thinking 2 moves ahead. That first day, Adana had felt useful and seen. But she also noticed the first thread unravel, the woman 4 shops away, the one whose laughter rolled like marbles on a tiled floor, always found something to say to Uzoma, loud enough for everyone to hear, sweet enough to stir something sour in Adana's gut. Rita was not the kind of woman you would forget even if you tried. She wore her confidence like perfume, strong and deliberate, lingering long after she walked away. Her shop wasn't as well stocked as Uzoma's, but she made up for it with charisma. She sold phone casings, earphones, and other accessories, but her true merchandise seemed to be attention. She had a way of folding her voice into a joke and tossing it like a hand fan across the aisle, hitting whoever she aimed at, always Uzoma. "Mr. Sharp Sharp, you never dull," she said one afternoon, twirling a lollipop in her mouth. "Your wife better hold you tight-o." The men nearby laughed. Uzoma chuckled and waved her off, but Adana, sitting quietly in the corner, felt the laughter coil around her spine. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. What would she say? That a joke was too sharp for her skin? That a laugh stung worse than a slap? Each day, Rita grew bolder, dropping oranges by their table, borrowing phone chargers with an unnecessary shoulder touch, calling Uzoma shop husband. Adana noticed everything, the glances, the smirks, the lingering pauses, and each time she brought it up to Uzoma in hushed tones on their way home, he brushed it aside like dust on a sleeve. Rita is like that with everyone. USEF, loosen up small. but Adana could not loosen what was tightening inside her. It was Rita's absence that pulled the mask off Yuzoma's calm. 2 days. She didn't open her shop. On the first day, Yuzoma stood more often than he sat, peering through the spaces between umbrellas and curious customers. He asked one of the street boys if he had seen Auntie Rita on the road. The boy shrugged. Maybe she traveled. He checked his phone more times than he sold anything that day. Adana, seated nearby, pretended not to notice, but she was counting every sigh, every glance, every idle scratch of his bearded chin. By the second day, it was no longer curiosity that painted Yuzoma's face, it was worry. And then the phone call came, the one Adana overheard. Yuzoma had waited until she stepped inside. He must have thought she was out of earshot. The way his voice dropped, the softness, the warmth, it felt like a betrayal wrapped in politeness. And that offer to send money, small as it was, burned like pepper in open wounds. That night, Adana fed their daughter in silence. Yuzoma told her Rita was sick, casually, like it was a market update. She's better now, he said, rubbing his forehead. I just sent her something small for medicine. Adana nodded, but said nothing. She didn't trust her voice not to shake. That night, sleep sat on her chest like a stone, and her dreams were full of half-spoken truths and Yuzoma's laughter mixing with Rita's like oil and water refusing to separate. The next morning, Adana moved like someone who had swallowed something bitter in her sleep. Her eyes were quiet, but her thoughts roared like a hidden waterfall, and Yuzoma, oblivious, went about preparing for the shop like it was just another day. He ironed his shirt, dusted off the baby slippers, and called out for his wallet like clockwork. To an outsider, nothing looked wrong, but beneath that roof, the air had shifted. Adana didn't ask him what time he'd be back. She didn't remind him to buy baby wipes. She didn't speak at all, and Yuzoma, either unaware or pretending to be, didn't push her. In the shop, she sat in her usual corner, holding their daughter and staring past the customers into nothing in particular. Rita had returned. Her shutter was rolled up halfway, and she sat outside her shop on a white plastic chair like nothing had happened, eating roasted plantain and pear. Her laughter returned with full confidence, and so did the banter. Yuzoma waved to her from afar. Rita responded with a grin that danced on her lips like something only the two of them understood. Adana watched. She watched the way Yuzoma's eyes flickered toward Rita every now and then, not with guilt, but with the care of someone monitoring a fragile friend. That was what hurt the most. It wasn't even that he did something terrible. It was that he cared enough to worry, but not enough to explain. Later that afternoon, a customer came asking for phone batteries, and while Yuzoma was attending to him, Adana stepped out and stood near a stack of banana crates, just beside the meat seller stand. Her heart was too loud. She could hear Rita on a phone call, laughing again. A passing comment from her made Adana freeze. Thank God, oh. That medicine worked sharp. Yuzoma, God go bless you. The laughter that followed wasn't just gratitude. It felt like a signal, a public announcement meant for just one listener. And Yuzoma, like a dog hearing the whistle meant only for him, chuckled from behind his glass counter. Adana returned to her seat in silence. That night, as they locked up, she walked ahead of Yuzoma, not waiting for him to hand over the keys like he usually did. She carried the baby without asking him to help, her wrapper swaying with more force than the wind required. At home, she bathed the child, prepared their Garian soup, and ate without waiting. Yuzoma noticed but said nothing. When he tried to hold her that night, she rolled to the edge of the mattress, and for the first time in a long while, the space between their backs felt colder than harmattan. He didn't ask what was wrong. Maybe he thought it would pass. But Adana knew better. She had tasted the kind of silence that builds walls, not fences, and each unspoken sentence was a brick. The following day, the shop felt like a theater, and everyone had picked a role. Rita was the lead actress, bright as ever, energetic, her waist swinging like a metronome to a rhythm only she could hear. Uzoma was the loyal supporting cast, chipping in jokes, shaking his head at her antics, occasionally calling out warnings like, "Make you no go scatter market with that your laugh-o." The crowd around them played their part too, egg laughers, bench warmers, small gossipers dressed as customers. And then there was Adana, invisible stagehand, adjusting the baby's feeding cup and folding cartons no one asked her to fold. But her eyes? They watched everything. She watched the way Rita moved closer when she talked to Uzoma, her hand brushing his shoulder once too often. She watched how Uzoma smiled more when she was around, and how that smile vanished the moment he turned to face his wife. And what irritated her wasn't just jealousy, it was the erosion. The slow disintegration of respect, the quiet way her presence had become furniture in her husband's space, while another woman's voice had become music. She wasn't interested in drama. She didn't want to fight for what was already hers. But inside her, something whispered that if she kept swallowing silence, one day it would choke her. And so she sat still, swallowing pride, frustration, suspicion, and worst of all, the growing need to confront Rita in a way that would make her question every joke she ever made. By the time the week drew to a close, Adana had reached her boiling point, but she disguised it in a smile. Not the kind that said everything was fine, but the kind that warned you the storm had chosen silence as its disguise. She began waking up earlier, preparing the baby's things with a kind of precision that mirrored military routine. Her voice returned, but it came cold, polite, mechanical, like a gate that opens only when knocked. Uzoma noticed, eventually. One evening, while they were counting sales under the fluorescent bulb that hummed like a stubborn mosquito, he asked, "Are we good?" Adana nodded. That nod carried 1,000 unspoken accusations, but Uzoma took it as permission to relax. That same evening, Rita came over with a bowl of jollof rice wrapped in foil. "I cooked too much," she said, laughing. "You people must chop-o." Uzoma took it with a smile and turned to Adana. "Babe, seafood." Adana looked up, her eyes locking with Rita's, and smiled. "Thank you," she said. "I'll be by your shop tomorrow. I want to talk." The tone was gentle. The message wasn't. Rita blinked. "En? Hope no walla." "No walla," Adana said. But her smile was now a blade wrapped in velvet. And for the first time since Rita joined that shop line, she looked unsure of herself. Uzoma stood there, unaware of the grenade quietly placed between two women's hearts. Adana wasn't going to scream or fight. She had no appetite for disgrace. But the time for silence had expired. What was unsaid had now become the sharpest thing in the room. Rita spent the next morning pretending not to be watching the clock, but her eyes betrayed her. She arrived earlier than usual, sweeping her shopfront with more energy than the dust required. Every glance she threw toward Usoma's stall was careful, quick enough not to be obvious, slow enough to catch any movement behind his shutter. When Adana walked in with the baby strapped behind her, there was a noticeable shift in the air, like the moment before rain falls, quiet, but filled with promise. She greeted everyone along the corridor, not missing a single face, but her tone was even and free of cheer. Uzoma, seated behind his counter scribbling something in his ledger, looked up briefly and said "morning," as if they were shop neighbors instead of husband and wife. Adana returned his greeting, then placed the baby's flask on the shelf like she was setting down a truth too heavy to keep carrying. It didn't take long for Rita to show her face. She strolled over with the same bowl of rice from the day before, now empty, wiped clean as if the entire episode of gift and gratitude had evaporated. "Your wife said she wanted to see me," Rita said with a half-laugh, addressing Uzoma first like she needed his permission to proceed. He blinked, surprised. "See you?" he repeated, turning to Adana with a look that hovered between confusion and concern. Adana stood up gently, her face calm. "Yes. I just want to talk to her privately," she said, brushing imaginary dust off her gown. Rita nodded, chewing her bottom lip. There was no crowd, no audience, just the three of them, and tension weaving itself like a tight wrapper around their feet. They walked to the narrow alley behind the row of shops, where the noise of customers and honking kiki riders faded into the background. It was a path swept only by wind and silence, bordered by cracked cement walls and patches of moss. Rita leaned against the wall with crossed arms, chewing gum now, a nervous habit she picked up when she needed to hide her thoughts. Adana stood directly across from her, her hands folded, not in defense, but in quiet resolve. There was no shaking in her voice when she began. I won't take long. I just need to ask you something woman to woman, she said. Rita gave a slow nod, her smile thinning. I've watched you and Uzoma for months. The laughing, the inside jokes, the food, the touches that you pretend are accidents, Adana continued, her words neither loud nor trembling. You're not his sister, and you're not his friend in the way friends are supposed to be when a man is married. Rita scoffed slightly. You're reading too much into friendliness. I'm like this with everybody. But her eyes did a quick dance, darting left and right, as if searching for somewhere to hide the guilt she wasn't ready to carry. Adana stepped forward, not threateningly, but like a woman walking toward her own peace. Then let me say this clearly. Whatever game you're playing, I'm not laughing. You can crack jokes and share snacks, but leave my husband out of your storyline. Rita's gum slowed. She tried to hold her composure, but the truth, raw and unclothed, had already slapped her chest. Nothing happened between us, she said at last. Maybe you should talk to him too. Adana nodded, her voice colder now. Oh, I will. But I needed to make sure you understood me. Loud and clear. The moment they stepped back into the shop line, everyone seemed to be pretending not to notice. But silence has a scent, and it was thick in the air. Uzoma looked up as they returned, eyes darting from Adana's unreadable face to Rita's suddenly quiet demeanor. He said nothing, but the weight of their entrance pushed his breath down into his belly. Rita walked back to her stall without a word, didn't wave at anyone, and for the first time did not laugh at anything. Adana sat beside the baby and began unpacking a new box of bibs like confrontation hadn't just occurred. But inside her chest pulsed with 1,000 drums. She wasn't proud of the moment, but she wasn't ashamed either. Sometimes a woman has to pick between being liked and being respected, and today she had chosen the latter. Uzoma came to her a little later, standing awkwardly beside the glass counter, pretending to check the sales book. What did you say to her? He asked, voice low. I said what needed saying, Adana replied, eyes still focused on her work. Did I lie? She added, finally meeting his gaze. Uzoma didn't answer, and the silence between them was louder than any quarrel. That day, he didn't joke with Rita. He barely looked her way. And as they closed the shop at sunset, he walked beside Adana without reaching for the baby's bag, without cracking a single word. Even the rustle of polythene on the road sounded more comfortable than their footsteps. At home, Adana washed her face 3 times before entering the kitchen. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from exhaustion. Emotional weight has a way of clinging to your bones long after the moment is past. Uzoma sat in the parlor with his eyes fixed on the fan, as if its slow rotation held answers he couldn't voice. Their daughter babbled softly from her mat, unaware of the quiet war her parents waged in silence. Adana prepared yam porridge and served it without speaking. Uzoma ate slowly, pausing often, like each spoonful required more effort than hunger could justify. When he finally spoke, it was as though his throat had swallowed rocks. I didn't cheat, he said. It was just kindness. She was sick. I didn't mean for it to look like something else. Adana didn't interrupt. She let him speak, but her face remained unreadable. You don't have to cheat to make someone feel small, she replied, her voice steady. You just have to forget what matters to them. Uzoma looked away, his fingers tightening around his spoon. That night they lay in bed facing opposite walls again, but the air between them had changed. It no longer carried only anger, it carried a flicker of reflection. And though they didn't speak again until morning, something had shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the beginning of a mirror placed where a curtain used to hang. Uzoma had always considered himself a man of reason, one who avoided confrontation not out of cowardice, but because he believed peace could be negotiated in silence. But over the days that followed Adana's conversation with Rita, he came to understand that silence could also be punishment with no expiry date. Every morning, he'd watch his wife go through the motions of preparing for the shop like someone tending a garden whose flowers no longer interested her. She tied the baby to her back with the same cloth, arranged her hair the same way, but something essential had disappeared from her eyes. They no longer sparkled with curiosity or followed his movements in the shop like they used to. Her greetings became functional, her laughter buried somewhere between duty and exhaustion. He wanted to ask her to smile again, to tell him a story about her dreams like she did in the early days, but something always held him back, the guilt of knowing that while his body had stayed loyal, his attention had wandered. In his head, he kept arguing with himself, was it wrong to send someone money for drugs? Didn't she say she was sick? But beneath those questions lay one bitter truth. He had started treating Adana like background noise, and another woman like a radio that played his favorite station. The market began to notice, not in loud whispers or wagging tongues, but in the quiet way traders looked away when Uzoma passed by, as though trying not to step into a room where the air was already thick. Rita's energy shifted too. Her greetings to Uzoma grew cautious, her laughter trimmed to polite chuckles. She no longer brought food, no longer leaned on his stall while waiting for customers. She stuck to her corner like someone who had been warned by a boundary too clear to cross again. But it wasn't just Rita that changed, it was everyone. Even the customer who used to joke that Uzoma and Rita would make a better comedy duo stopped laughing when he came by. The laughter had gone stale, sour like soup forgotten on the fire. Adana noticed it too. She didn't gloat or act triumphant, but she walked straighter now. Not because she'd won, but because she'd chosen not to be walked over. Yet the ache didn't leave. Knowing she'd spoken her mind didn't erase the sting of wondering why she'd had to say those things at all. A wife shouldn't have to compete for her husband's focus in the space they built together. She'd started leaving the shop earlier now, saying the baby needed longer naps at home. Uzoma never argued. He just nodded and stayed behind, watching her walk away like a door closing in slow motion. At home, the silence grew fatter. Conversation shrunk to logistics. Did you boil the water? Where's the receipt for the diapers? Functional exchanges drained of intimacy. Even the baby seemed to sense it, clinging more to Adana and offering Uzoma only fleeting smiles. One evening, the power went out and the rechargeable lamp flickered low. Adana lit a candle and sat beside the child, humming an old lullaby her mother used to sing. Uzoma watched from the doorway, his shadow stretching along the wall. He wanted to walk in, sit beside her, rest his head on her shoulder, and say, "Let's talk," but shame hung like heavy clothing on his shoulders. He remembered the first time he met Adana, how she'd refused to give him her number until he bought plantain from her mother twice without haggling. She had always been a woman of quiet dignity. And now, here she was, still by his side, still cooking, still waking early, but her heart no longer beating in sync with his. He sat on the couch and closed his eyes, imagining how things might have been if he'd drawn clearer lines from the start, if he had paid attention not just to what he wasn't doing wrong, but to what wasn't right. He had thought faithfulness was measured only by physical acts, but he was starting to understand that even laughter, shared in the wrong places, could wound. A week later, Uzoma found himself standing outside the shop at dusk, staring at the sky as a light drizzle began to fall. The clouds looked like soaked cotton wool, heavy and indecisive. He wasn't waiting for a customer, nor was he thinking of Rita. He was thinking of Adana's silence, the kind that didn't scream or slam doors, but bled slowly, like an unseen cut. When she walked toward him from the direction of the pharmacy, umbrella in one hand, the baby strapped on her back, he stepped aside to let her in. She placed the baby's cough syrup on the counter and reached for a dry cloth to wipe her arms. Uzoma took the cloth from her without a word and began dabbing her shoulders. She didn't stop him. "You're cold," he said finally. "Not just from the rain," she replied. "It wasn't a jab. It was a truth." He nodded, his throat thick. "I miss you," he said quietly. "I miss how we used to be." She folded her arms and looked at him for a long moment, as if measuring how much of him she could trust again. "Then start walking back," she said. "But don't take shortcuts. Come through the same road you got lost on." Uzoma stood there, the cloth in his hand damp now, not from the rain, but from his grip. He knew what she meant. No fast fixes, no sudden sweetness. He would have to earn back the peace he'd traded for playful moments and thoughtless gestures. The drizzle thickened into rain, and yet, for the first time in weeks, he felt something soften between them. Not love restored, but a window cracked open, enough for air to come in. Days trickled past like leaking taps, slow, persistent, and each drop louder than the one before it. Uzoma started doing small things again, not the grand gestures that fill photo albums, but the kind of ordinary kindnesses that make you stop and look twice. He would wash the baby's feeding bottles without being asked, return early from the shop without excuses, and sometimes pause in the middle of counting stock just to ask Adana how she was feeling, not out of obligation, but with eyes that meant it. But the truth was that you cannot sweep away mistrust with a broom. It lingers like dust in corners, refusing to go just because you've started dusting the shelves. Adana noticed his efforts, yes, but she had learned something about silence. It gave her room to see clearly, and what she saw was a man who had allowed another woman's attention to matter just a little too much. There were no lipstick stains, no flirty texts, no scandal. But sometimes betrayal isn't loud. Sometimes it's the quiet shift of attention from one heart to another, the way laughter finds a new address, while the old one goes without joy. Even now, Rita had withdrawn, but her absence had become its own kind of presence. She no longer bantered across the aisle. Her door remained open, her eyes buried in her phone or her record book. But Adana didn't trust the silence anymore. Sometimes, stillness only means a storm has changed direction. On a Sunday morning, they decided to attend church as a family for the first time in weeks. Uzoma wore his iron senator wear, Adana dressed in a simple lace gown, and the baby wore yellow shoes that squeaked with every step she took. The walk to church was quiet, but not hostile. Uzoma carried the baby for most of the journey, occasionally adjusting her on his hip like a man relearning fatherhood, one tiny movement at a time. Adana walked beside him, not holding hands, but no longer pulling away either. When they arrived, they sat 3 rows from the altar, and the sermon that day was about Samson and Delilah, but it wasn't the preacher's words that held Adana's attention. It was Usoma's bowed head during prayers, his hands trembling slightly as he whispered into his palms. After service, they passed by a local suya spot to buy some meat, and for a brief second, laughter returned when the baby reached out and grabbed a piece straight from the pack. Uzoma looked at Adana and chuckled. "She's your daughter, no doubt." And for the first time in what felt like ages, Adana smiled without calculation. It didn't last long, but it was real. That night, as they lay in bed with the baby between them, Uzoma said, "I know I messed up, and I don't deserve how patient you've been." Adana turned slowly toward him, her eyes heavy but open. "I just wanted to matter, Uzoma. Not to everyone. Just to you." Her voice wasn't raised, but it echoed. Uzoma reached across the mattress, placed his hand gently on hers, and replied, "You always did. I just got careless. The night didn't heal everything, but it put salve on wounds that had stayed open too long." The next day at the shop, something subtle but significant happened. Rita stood outside her stall, rearranging a delivery of new power banks. Uzoma greeted her plainly, no jokes, no gestures, and returned to wiping down his glass counter. Adana, seated beside him, continued packing out a carton of chargers like it was just another Monday. But when Rita walked toward their shop, clutching a folded receipt, Adana's shoulders stiffened just slightly. "Please," Rita said, eyes darting between them, "do you still have those techno chargers that came last week?" Uzoma answered without hesitation. "Yes, they're right here," he said, lifting the pack and placing them on the table. Adana didn't interrupt, didn't frown, didn't speak. But when Rita handed over the money and turned to leave, she paused for a second. I'm sorry, Adana," she said, her voice barely above the hum of passing motorcycles. "I didn't mean to cause anything between you two. I crossed a line I shouldn't have." The words hung in the air like clothes on a line, exposed, swaying, but drying nonetheless. Adana didn't say anything. She just nodded, a slow, dignified motion that accepted the apology without inviting further conversation. Rita left, and for the first time in weeks, the shop felt lighter, not because there was no pain left, but because some of the truth had been spoken aloud. Sometimes apologies aren't for reconciliation. They're just permission for a wound to start scabbing. That evening, as dusk spilled its golden paint across the sky, Uzoma and Adana sat outside their house on two plastic chairs, the baby crawling between their feet. The neighbor's radio played a faint gospel tune in the background, and someone's stew wafted through the compound, peppery and nostalgic. Uzoma turned to Adana and said, "I want to teach you everything about the business. Not just because I want help, but because I want us to own something together." Adana looked at him for a long time, not blinking. "Are you ready to trust me with it all?" she asked, not referring to stock lists or suppliers. Uzoma's nod came with tears. "I trust you with more than I trust myself now," he said. And that was when Adana's hand slowly reached for his. Their fingers touched like people who had once been strangers and now remembered how to feel familiar again. The baby cooed and laughed, clapping at a bird that flew past. That laughter, theirs and hers, became a soft chorus, one that didn't erase all the wrong, but began to drown the ache. Healing didn't arrive like a parade. It came like this, in quiet moments under orange skies, with fingers interlocked not out of obligation, but out of choice. And for the first time in a long while, Adana didn't feel like someone learning her husband's world. She felt like someone who had been welcomed into it properly, with the door wide open and her name etched on the frame. The mornings no longer felt like rehearsals. They had become real again, messy, unpredictable, and filled with the kind of laughter that didn't need to be forced. The baby's cries for attention, Uzoma's soft curses when he misplaced his pen, and Adana's humming, while folding wrappers, made the house feel like a living heart again, not a shrine for grudges. It wasn't a perfect return. There were still cracks, still moments when Adana would glance at Uzoma too long, searching his eyes for residue of a storm that had already passed. But there was something new in the way he looked at her now, something that said, "I see you. I remember." She had started coming back to the shop regularly, not because she had to, but because she chose to. And this time, Uzoma wasn't just asking her to sit by the glass and watch. He was teaching line by line, figure by figure. "If you buy 3 of these chargers at 800 Nigerian Nairas each," he explained one afternoon, "and sell them at 1,200 Nigerian Nairas, you've made more than just gain. You've made trust in the eyes of the customer. Pricing isn't just math, it's a reflection of your character." Adana wrote everything down carefully, nodding with her eyes more than her head. He watched her and felt a quiet pride that had nothing to do with business. He had once nearly lost her to silence, and now, every word exchanged felt like a stone laid on a new foundation. "Ah, Madam Day, learn work now." They would joke and Adana would smile, not the brittle kind from before, but the kind that said, "Yes, and I'm not just learning this, I'm reclaiming it." On one particularly hot Thursday, as the heat danced on the zinc roofs and flies buzzed like tired traders, Adana walked alone through the market to pick up new packaging nylon for the shop. It was her first solo errand since Uzoma handed her partial control of supplies, and as she walked, she felt something stir in her, a mix of nervousness and boldness. She remembered how Rita used to swing her hips like she owned the street, how she used to toss her voice like a scarf across every corner. But now, as Adana walked past Rita's stall, the roles had flipped in a way that no one clapped for, but everyone observed. Rita looked up from her phone, then down again. Her eyes did not rise to meet Adana's. There was no malice, just a quiet resignation. Rita was still there, still selling, but her voice had become wallpaper there, but no longer central. Adana didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She just walked by, head high, but not heavy, her spirit unburdened. On her way back, she bought Puff Puff for Uzoma and a soft drink he liked, something he hadn't asked for, but she remembered he once mentioned after a long day. When she returned, he looked at the black nylon and chuckled. "Ah, my babe is spoiling me," he said. "Just say you've turned me to your apprentice," she replied, playfully elbowing him. For a moment, the shop felt like their old living room before Rita, before tension, before the endless guessing. Uzoma unwrapped a snack and handed her the first bite. "You first," he said. And in that simple gesture, something deeper was said. The center has shifted, and it now holds. The following Sunday, they invited Uzoma's cousin and his wife over for lunch. It wasn't a special occasion, but Adana insisted they share their joy while it was still fresh. She cooked yam porridge with dry fish and garnished it with ugu leaves the way Uzoma liked it. The cousin's wife, a bubbly woman named Kamsi, noticed how Uzoma hovered near Adana in the kitchen, peeling plantain without being asked, offering to stir the soup, asking where the salt was kept. "My own husband," she laughed loudly, "won't even know where our matches are." Uzoma laughed too, wiping his brow. "I'm just trying to maintain what I almost lost." Kamsi raised an eyebrow, and Adana smiled softly. "It's been a journey," she said, "but we're here." After lunch, they all sat outside under the mango tree as the breeze teased the leaves, and the scent of leftover food lingered sweetly. Kamsi told jokes, the cousins shared shop gossip, and the baby toddled between everyone, squealing each time someone clapped for her. Uzoma looked at Adana in that moment and felt something he hadn't felt in a long while, peace that didn't need validation. It wasn't dramatic. There were no speeches, but he reached for her hand and held it, and she didn't pull away. She squeezed back once. That small squeeze was worth more than any sorry he had said in the past. It was the language of people who knew they could have broken, but didn't. In the weeks that followed, Adana grew into her role not just as wife or mother, but as co-builder. She handled restocking without needing prompts, adjusted price tags to match market rates, and even suggested they start an online page to reach more customers. Uzoma watched her bloom and wondered how close he had come to stunting her growth with his carelessness. One evening, as the sun collapsed lazily behind Eduma's rooftops and the sky turned the color of ripe mangoes, they sat outside with their legs stretched out, a bowl of roasted groundnuts between them. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Uzoma asked. "I do," Adana said, cracking a shell, "and how easily we could have undone everything." Uzoma nodded, reaching for her hand. "Thank you for holding on even when it felt like slipping was easier." Adana leaned back, watching the last of the sunlight fade. "Just don't make me hold on alone again," she whispered. The breeze answered for him, rustling the trees gently, as if nature itself promised to bear witness. And as the night folded itself gently over the compound and their baby slept soundly inside, Uzoma and Adana sat hand in hand, their silence no longer a wedge but a woven thing, fragile, yes, but stronger than before. And in that stillness, they understood something rare. Sometimes love doesn't scream to be heard. Sometimes it's found in what we say after the worst has already passed, and in what we choose never to say again. Sometimes what breaks relationships isn't betrayal in its loudest form. It's the silence, the small slights, the unattended needs, the words left unsaid for too long. Like Adana, many people carry silent wounds while smiling through routine, waiting for their partner to notice the weight of what they never complain about. And like Uzoma, some think faithfulness is only about actions, forgetting that loyalty also includes attention, intention, and emotional presence. If you're in a relationship, marriage, friendship, or family, don't wait until your silence turns into distance. Speak, but speak in love. Listen, but listen with your heart. Laugh, but know where the lines are. There's no award for being the loudest in someone else's life when you're causing quiet storms in their home. Don't be afraid to apologize, and more importantly, don't be afraid to mean it. Respect should never need a reminder. It should be a given, woven into every gesture, every joke, and every glance. If you've hurt someone, fix it, not just with words, but with consistency. And if you're the one who was hurt, remember, healing is not forgetting. It's choosing peace over pride, wisdom over war, and knowing when silence is power, not punishment. Heavenly Father, we thank you for hearts that still feel and homes that can still heal. For every listener who has been silenced by pain, overlooked in love, or forgotten in their own home, Lord, restore their voice and their joy. For those who are trying to hold on while feeling like they're holding alone, strengthen their grip and whisper peace into the spaces where resentment once grew. Father, we ask for wisdom for every Uzoma still learning that loyalty is more than just not cheating. It's presence, it's protection, it's putting your partner first when no one else is watching. We pray for every Adana who has cried in silence. May she find not just attention, but honor. May her dignity never be traded for explanation. For every home where laughter has dried up, Lord, send new wine. Where suspicion lives, bring understanding. Where pride has built a wall, bring humility to build a bridge. Teach us, Lord, not to let outsiders become insiders to our private spaces. Help us protect what you have joined, and restore what our carelessness has cracked. Let love return in full color. Let trust grow again like a tree planted beside still waters. Let joy echo again in rooms that have gone quiet. We seal every heart, every home, every couple listening now in your grace. Let this story not just entertain, but awaken. Let it not just teach, but transform. In Jesus' name, amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.